Hello, this is Virtualis Chess Noob, learning and having fun with chess. Today I'm going to talk about a tactic that can give a strategic advantage. Of all the pawns, the f-pawn has a unique weakness. Unlike all the other pawns, it is defended by no piece other than the king at the beginning of the game. This makes it a target, as strategically, the king is the one that needs defending, rather than the other way around. This is especially in the earlier stages of the game. Active king movements result in the loss of the right to castle, and potentially places king safety at risk. Even when the king has castled short, the f-pawn often remains a target if it remains on its opening square, as we'll see in this game. Please enjoy! Let's start with a quick look at the review. Chess.com's algorithm. I played reasonably well in this game, 85% accuracy, my opponent around 76%, but you can see we started off the game really quite even. And then eventually I managed to get a little bit ahead, and then the opponent made a critical error. So they made a few blunders, as we can see. Let's have a look at the analysis. I had the white pieces. I'm an e4 player, e4, and the opponent played c6, so the beginning of the Caro-Kann defense. I don't really know very much about the Caro-Kann, but I know that it's often good to just take the full center. Expected opponent plays d5, attacking the pawn, now on e4, and usually here I will play knight c3. And in this game, my opponent captured. So capture back with the knight, and knight now moves forward. So I'm not familiar with the theory here at all. I thought about this for a little bit, as you can see, and I thought, look, I don't see how this is good for me trying to defend the knight. So let's just straight up capture. They probably will have to damage their pawn structure. And you can see a small advantage to white. And this is apparently the Tartakawa variation of the Caro-Kann. I do not know the theory here, so I just basically played chess. So here I thought I did probably need to do some sort of extra defense to that pawn. So I thought I would take out the bishop. So the knight move apparently was best straight up. So that's good to know here. The opponent now developed bishop e6. I now developed my knight. Opponent developed their other bishop. I developed my other bishop. So a little bit symmetric, I suppose. But, the opponent has this this doubled up pawn here, which is probably, in the long term, I thought, not so good for them. They now short castle, and I short castle as well. And as per sort of the theme in this game, very often when the opponent short castles, this pawn becomes a problem. And as sort of mentioned in the game, the pawn, the f-pawns on both sides, so for white be f2 and for the opponent on f7, at the beginning of the game, it is defended by nothing other than the king. So let's see what happens in this game. So whenever the opponent sort of castles short, I do start to think about, is there a way I can attack that pawn? They develop the other knight. Now I push a pawn forward. So now that I've sort of castled, I'm thinking that there's a potential good threat there. The opponent lining that up, which I suppose makes sense, but my knight defends. I thought that is okay for me at the moment. The opponent plays bishop f4, which was a good move, and I thought about here a bit. Obviously they want to capture, and then potentially they can capture back, developing their queen. But I thought I have no problems with them capturing. Because one of the things in terms of thinking about how to put an attack on the f-file is to open up my own, get rid of my own pawn, because then I open up the file for the rook. And if they capture, I capture back, and now my rook, there's a sort of semi-open file for my rook. So I thought that potential was good for me. So I decided to just push another pawn, put an extra defender on that pawn, take up some space on the queen side as well. As expected, the opponent captured. Logically, that's what they planned to do in the first place. I captured back, and I was fairly happy with sort of that chain of pawns. They push a6, which I assume means that they weren't entirely sure what to do. I sort of, create a little pyramid there. Opponent now plays rook ad8, and here my thinking was to try to potentially plant my rook, my knight here, and of course that's defended, defended two ways. So potentially I'm happy to trade on my terms there. And even if they chose not to do that, what they will probably have to do is to push a pawn in front of their king, potentially I think weakening the defense of the king in the longer term. So that's what they did. At this point, that's good for them. Bring the knight back. And now there's potentially a hole, a permanent weakness there. They push another pawn, and you can see we now have sort of a move in the advantage to me. At this point, I now slide my knight forward. So basically, potentially attacking that bishop, and also with now attack on that f7 pawn. Opponent tries to move the bishop out of the way. That's cool. I now push the pawn forward. What are you going to do? Captures. I capture back. And here is a way to potentially get rid of a defender. And I was fairly happy with that transformation. I thought that was potentially good for me. So the opponent's pieces are somewhat blocked in at the moment. So that knight can't really go anywhere useful because all these squares are defended by my pieces. That rook is blocked in, that rook is blocked in, that queen doesn't really have a lot of places to go either. So all these squares are defended, so their pieces are quite blocked in. So I was reasonably happy that I was probably in a winning position here. And my plan next was to jam my knight here, even further restricting the movement of the queen, and also now to place an attack on that pawn again. So they move a rook, which is fine. So here we go. The knight jams in that queen, and also now an attack. So if they don't do something, I can take that pawn. They make a move. I bring another attacker, bring sort of extra pressure to bear on that pawn. Opponent moves their other rook. And interestingly here, I thought, look, I need to get rid of one of the defenders. Was what I was thinking. Stockfish sees another tactic, but here my goal was to place pressure on that pawn. And so with that rook, I thought I'm happy to potentially trade rooks here. Yep, they have to capture, otherwise that rook is potentially gone next turn. And here they crack, they feel the pressure on that pawn, and they slide it forwards. And why was that bad? Why was that bad? So you can see Stockfish reckons moving the knight out of the way with a potential sacrifice. Of course, the queen then sort of damages the defensive structure of these pawns. But the queen also, with that knight move, gives an extra defender to that pawn. That move is bad. Yes, they've removed pressure on that pawn. It's no longer really a target, but now I've got infiltration into the 7th rank, which is often very powerful for a rook. And that infiltration now is a real problem for the opponent. That's fine. So yep, that would have come with check. That would have been stronger. Doesn't matter. Opponent tries to move their knight out of the way, but here I've got check. Here I've got another check, forcing a trade. And of course, potentially that is checkmate if that knight ever stops guarding that pawn. And the king at the moment is trapped. The king cannot move anywhere else. Now, I did see that this was potentially going to be a problem for me, but I thought I should be able to get away. Now, of course, the mistake would be to do something silly like going there, because, that's going to end up being back rank mate, -1 turn, but still back rank mate all the same. So I have to move the king forward. And I thought here, what I'll be able to do is to simply escape with the king. So move the king up into that territory, and now it's safe. There we go. So they can now provide one last check, and now I can block with the rook, and they have no more checks. They simply have no more checks. The opponent lost sight of the fact that that knight was critically guarding that pawn. That was what was preventing checkmate. They attempted to double up on that rook, but of course that hung a mate in one. So good game for the opponent. GG. In this game, my opponent with the black pieces ultimately attempted to resolve the problem of their pawn on f7, which was targeted by multiple pieces by moving it forward to f5. As can be seen by the Stockfish evaluation, this was a critical error, a change from an already unfavourable evaluation of around +3 to a devastating +15. The best move for the opponent was to bring an extra defender to the pawn, but the way to do this was not obvious. As pawns cannot move backwards, the forward pawn push permitted an infiltration by my rook and queen, which ended up being winning after I evacuated my own king to safety. I hope you found this game interesting, and thanks for watching.